you for joining us in what we hope is a series of workshops with regard to the development of the Green Homes Grant Scheme specific for our sector. We've had one of these webinars recently on a separate topic, and I always have to be mindful of protocol. So if I may, it's purely from the point of view so that everybody can hear clearly. If everybody could put themselves on mute if you're not already on mute. And in terms of questions, so that the afternoon is going to be made up of 2 presentations. I'll introduce the gentleman shortly, but any questions that arise from those presentations, or indeed anything you'd like to ask us about, could you put the questions in the chat? So we'll get all the questions. We'll come to those in a Q&A at the end. Now, we've already had many questions, I'm delighted to say, so a lot of interest in this topic. So I'm mindful that we might not be able to cover all the questions, but rest assured we will answer them and circulate to everybody on this call. I'm also, for those who can't attend today, we are recording this so that other members can tune into this at their leisure. We also were going to have a representative from BEIS, but unfortunately, the gentleman is not available to attend today. But questions specific to BEIS will get answers, and again, we'll come back to you on that. So without further ado, just a sort of very quick background, obviously that you're all aware that the government, and we're very appreciative of the government for supporting construction in funding. I think we'd all agree the government has taken certain initiatives to support construction that were possibly unexpected, but the Green Homes Grant is one of those, initial funding a scheme of £2 billion. And it candidly probably took a lot of the sector, and I'm not talking roofing in particular, but generally a little bit by surprise because of the nature of how then we're all supposed to deliver the scheme, because the scheme has, if I may use expressions, strings attached. And it's what we're trying to achieve partly from today and moving forward is how we sort of unpick those strings and make sure they're going to work for our sector. We were very also mindful initially that we were going to really struggle to support the scheme with the timescale that was originally put to that. And we lobbied hard to get the scheme extended. And we're all delighted, I know across the whole of the industry, that the scheme is extended until March 2022. And indeed, I believe an additional £1 billion has been put into what is available for the scheme. Further to that, the scheme will link into the National Retrofit Strategy, which was signed off by the Construction Leadership Council, which, believe me, it's worth, we'll circulate that document at the end of this presentation as well, which sort of goes beyond this initial timescale and really consolidates clearly the government's commitment to the longer net zero targets. So without further ado, I'd like to first introduce to you Phil Mason. Phil is Head of Regulatory Engagement, no less, at Trustmark. And we'll follow that with Mr. Richard Miller, who is Head of Qualifications Standards at the NFRC, followed by Q&A. So over to Phil, and we'll start things off. Many thanks.
Okay, thanks, James. Right, good afternoon. Yeah. It's always nice to sort of enter something like this when people are in such a sort of good, buoyant frame of mind, having a bit of fun amongst each other. So that's always a good indicator to me when you've got to speak to a group of people, particularly around something that's got a few complexities around. I'm going to talk for, I don't know, I suppose about 15-20 minutes, just run through some slides. I want to make the slides available if I can. Well, I've already sent a copy over that they can be distributed, because sometimes when you talk to audiences of people, it's really kind of difficult to know at what level everybody is in their sort of terms of understanding, because everybody understands it different ways. So I've tried to pitch it at sort of just I think at a practical level that just gives you a little bit of background, a little bit of explanation about sort of Trustmark requirements. There's this thing called PAS 2030 certification that some people are familiar with. Some organisations have never even heard of it, which is I was going to say not understandable, which is understandable because it depends how you're connected to government scheme. Essentially the energy company obligation, as to any familiarity there is about the PAS. So I'm just going to see if I can just switch some slides fairly quickly. Just bear with me. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't work quite so well. I'm rather hopeful. Can somebody just give me a...
I think we lost Phil there.
It looks like we have, yes.
Right. Can I then, Richard, may I ask you to manfully step in and do the second part of the presentation whilst we try and get Phil back?
I certainly shall do. Obviously won't follow a natural sync from the presentation from Phil, but you'll get an understanding when he comes back and then presents. So I'm just going to share screen first of all with everybody just to get those slides up. Please just confirm when you can see them slides for me.
Yeah, we can see them,
Thank
Richard.
you.
Fantastic. So good afternoon to everybody, and I'd like to extend a welcome to today's participants, and I'd like to thank you all for registering with us today to play an active role in our route to PAS 2030. I would have gone on to thank Phil for his presentation, but I'm sure we can do that a little bit later on. As James introduced me earlier on, thank you very much for that. My name is Richard Miller. I'm the Head of Qualifications and Standards here at the NFRC, and I dare say I need to fit this in, a proud roofing operative by trade as well. So what am I going to do today? I'm going to explain a brief overview of what I'm presenting for you today. This includes the NFRC's route to PAS 2030 on behalf of our membership, planned timescales in order to achieve that accreditation. I want to give a little bit of an overview, and it is a high-level overview of the process involved in obtaining that accreditation and how we get there together. And finally, to provide some information that gives you thought on the future involvements, your future involvement with the Green Homes Grant Scheme. As mentioned, I'd like to allow me to run through the slides and then ask questions towards the end. We'll certainly put those questions in the comments box. And just to reiterate, some of those questions that we may not be able to answer today, we will be sending over to the BAE's representative and getting feedback for you. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see the picture on the screen right now. This is the time frame that we have put together in order to obtain PAS 2030 accreditation. Just to quickly explain the key. On the slide, the orange boxes relate to work that has or needs to be done and carried out by the NFRC's Competent Person Scheme in order for us to obtain PAS 2030 accreditation, whilst the blue boxes represent actions to be taken by you to support your decision in whether to get involved in the Green Homes Grant Scheme. We currently have a planned end date to offer certification of the PAS 2030 to you by mid to end of March 2021, but understand these dates are dependent on third-party auditing of our processes through UKAS. We also have some additional supporting documentation we have planned to create in order to facilitate the offer to you, the members, and to ensure our compliance with the standards. Looking on the timeline, I can confirm that we've now completed the planned work up until year end, and we're now just awaiting a report from UKAS to support our work throughout January 2021. And I will say that actually in the last 10 minutes, ironically, that report has actually filtered into my inbox. As you can see, I've added some actions here that I believe are crucial, if not done already by yourselves, in obtaining a good understanding of PAS 2030 and the PAS 2035 criteria, followed by careful consideration of your involvement with the Green Homes Grant, which will require you, if not already, to join the NFRC Competent Person Scheme. So plenty to consider there. We are discussing our next steps in relation to sharing information with our membership, and this will likely result in further webinars in January and February, respectively, in order to take further questions and to share knowledge. And as Phil alluded to at the beginning here, this is just the start, certainly not the middle or the end. You will by now be aware that the NFRC has taken the decision to move Trustmark certification over its Competent Person Scheme exclusively, and notification was first sent back in October of this year, notifying all members of this change and options available. There are several reasons for making this change, some of which as follows. There is updated scheme provider requirements in the new 2.2 framework, which also incorporates the PAS specific measures, and PAS is publicly available specification standards, for those that are not familiar with the acronym, which are to be certified by the PAS 2031 or ISO 17065 accredited organisation, of which our Competent Person Scheme is and the NFRC is not. The link to the framework operating requirements, as I've just mentioned there, we can circulate to you all following this webinar. I think it's a really good piece of documentation for you all to read and to educate yourself on the current requirements. It is worth noting that annual checks through a monitoring process that use both on and off-site measures is specific to the new framework. And on-site assessments will also include midpoint checks as well as project start and end spot checks, and will be representative across all trades and type of work in which you engage. This also incorporates subcontractors used, and monitoring will be carried out in accordance with risk. This will see us move to a more robust approach to auditing based on risk rating. The benefit of being in the competent person scheme means as part of the ongoing evaluation and monitoring processes, most of the evidence required will already be available. So with this in mind, the correct decision for the Federation is to move all Trustmark activity to its competent person scheme, which will remove duplication for you as members and ensure that we remain compliant with Trustmark's operating requirements. So here is what is contained in our current scope extension by UKAS that we have applied for, that incorporates flat and pitched roof insulation and room in roof. As highlighted earlier on, there is a process to get us to the point of delivery, and this contains the points shown in the slide. We have already successfully applied for the extension. We have now completed our gap analysis on the process, and we move into further scheme development. Our desktop and office-based audit is planned for early February, and we're looking to confirm a date for our witness assessment towards the end of February. We'll then receive confirmation of our extension to scope as a competent person scheme, and also request scope extension from Trustmark at this time. It'll be at this point we then come back out to you as membership and get you to apply for scope extension through the competent person scheme. This will then specifically state on your certification that you can carry out that work under PAS 2030 and that you are certified to do so. And a new certificate or a change of scope of certificate will be issued. So quite a bit of information on this slide, but I feel it's really, really important to ensure that I give as much information in such a short period of time to you as possible for you to carefully consider. As we said, the slides will be circulated after the meeting. So your role in the delivery of GHG measures, the Green Homes Grant through the NFRC Competent Person Scheme. Well, first of all, if you're not already, you need to join the Competent Person Scheme and obtain certification for flat, pitched, or metal roofing, which is accredited by UKAS under 17065. Once NFRC Competent Person Scheme have extended our scope to include those energy efficient measures under the PAS 2030 and Trustmark, you should then extend your scope via us, the Competent Person Scheme, to include those measures you wish to apply for. This would then enable us as a Competent Person Scheme to issue certification documenting those energy efficient measures for you. It is key as part of this process to ensure that you operate a quality management system, and ISO 9001 is a good place to start, but operating a system in line with this standard would suffice. Looking at the roles now, sort of halfway down that slide, again, I felt this was really, really important when I've been going through all the documentation to give a little bit of a brief overview. It may well be that roofing contractors may or may not have in-house suitably qualified personnel to fulfil the roles outlined here. However, contractors may procure these services elsewhere in support of meeting the requirements set out in PAS 2035. And PAS 2035 is the overarching standard that incorporates PAS 2030. There may also be instances where organisations are only looking specifically for PAS 2030 installers, where the rest of the roles are already in place, and this will also be a role you can fulfil under PAS 2013 once certified. It's important to note that prior to installation, the retrofit installer, which you will become, will confirm that a retrofit coordinator has been appointed in accordance with those overarching standards, PAS 2035. And I'm going to just give you a little bit more information on this now, and then get to the pinch point. Under the PAS 2030 requirements, installers are to obtain, prior to any installation, a retrofit design that complies with PAS 2035. However, final responsibility over the design sits with the retrofit coordinator. This highlights, and to the point, this highlights why a full understanding of all the roles within the process is crucial to successful delivery via the scheme, and goes back to my first slide in ensuring that we all educate and familiarise ourselves with the requirements of PAS 2035 and PAS 2030 respectively. Conversations with NFRC suppliers and manufacturers will take place early in the new year on supporting the design elements of PAS 2035 requirements. For reference, additional installer requirements for installation of energy efficient measures, once you receive, or if you're in possession already of the PAS 2030 standards, can be located in section B5 for flat roof insulation, B10 for pitched roof insulation, and B12 for room and roof insulation. And noting that we're recording this webinar, you can make reference to that once you've obtained them standards for easy identification of the area. So in a nutshell there, what I'm saying is we're all in this together. There's plenty of education that needs to be obtained, and we will do that during the first quarter of next year. Just a quick one on our auditing requirements. So as part of NFRC CPS scheme, we will receive annual audits from the Trustmark team. We'll also receive annual audits from UKAS under our 17065 obligations. In turn, we will look to audit contractors. We'll receive site audits from the competent person scheme, and this is dependent on risk and the amount of works completed. Trustmark will also carry out both on-site and desktop audits of works completed by contractors, and I believe that's up to around about 10% of the work completed under the scheme. However, as the NFRC and as NFRC members, we will utilise audits that are completed under these measures to support membership audit requirements to avoid duplication and additional costs where we can. So, looking a little bit at your options, first thing I'd ask everybody to do once you've listened to this presentation, and certainly Phil's, and over the Christmas period, is to reflect and assess your business capabilities. I'm asking the question, do you want to be involved? And I think that's a question you've got to firmly ask yourself and come to a conclusion. You can, of course, do nothing, but that means you cannot engage in anything to do with the Green Homes Grant. But certainly if you do want to get involved, here's a few steps. First of all, you can look to join the NFRC Competent Person Scheme, if not already registered. As I keep mentioning, and I'll always reiterate this, it's about education and preparation around the PAS 2035 and PAS 2030 standards respectively, and getting as much of an understanding on that as you can. And again, we'll be in that together. You can then extend your scope with the Competent Person Scheme for PAS 2030 certification, which ultimately includes additional auditing requirements under that criteria, and then extend your scope with the within the Trustmark scheme, which we would do on your behalf. Just looking at putting a bit of a summary together on that, and I think the first bullet point there is really, really key here, and James alluded to this right at the beginning of the meeting. Governments have acknowledged the lack of capacity in the industry, and an extension by 12 months to March 2022 has been applied, and I think that's absolutely the right decision that was made. Obviously, to allow everyone to get up to speed, get that education, get businesses positioned correctly to be able to offer those services under this Green Homes Grant scheme. NFRC are developing our processes to allow access for roofing contractors to access the scheme. However, I do need to state this does take time, and as the timeline I put on the first couple of slides there, we have been actively engaging in getting this process complete since the 7th of October, when we formally requested extension to scope by UKAS, and we do look to aim to have this concluded by the end of March 2021. You do need to consider if you wish to remain or indeed join the Trustmark scheme, which is necessary for the Green Homes Grant. And to put it simply, I think PAS 2030 right now will not be for everyone. I think careful consideration should be given regarding your business involvement in the scheme, mainly around business capacity and business capabilities. It's important to note that there's a heavy reliance on qualifications, of which RoofCert can play a role in that, around those vocational qualifications capabilities of delivering. Finally, I'd just like to thank you for listening, and we look forward to working with and on behalf of our membership to deliver PAS 2030 and all future standards that support professionalism of our industry and provides opportunity for our members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, would you just unshare? Thank you very much. Now, I believe Phil is back, the wonders of technology. So it always strikes at the worst time. So Phil, I trust the broadband to wherever you're based is fixed. The sticking plaster is on the router, and we'll have another go.
Absolute apologies. I don't think I can even blame broadband. When I tried to share screens, my laptop absolutely froze. So let me just, and I had to reboot. Let me just try again. Bear with me. you should be able to see some slides.
Yeah.
Success.
You can see the slides. Wow, that is a relief. So, like I say, absolutely sincere apologies. You should be able to see full screen. Right. Okay. I don't think there's any harm done in that, because what I just heard about PAS there is actually there's no particular order that these presentations could flow. So let me just get going. Just some fundamentals, really. On the 8th of July 2020, the Chancellor announced £2 billion, £1.5 billion of which coming into the voucher scheme, and 0.5 billion going into what we call the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery, which is where local authorities will deliver through their supply chains installations under the grant scheme. That's a different scheme, but a branch of it. So I think the thing that we're all very, very pleased to see, and I don't think you can overemphasize this, is the extension of the scheme to September 2020. That deals with some of the sort of anxieties and frustrations that have been about people gearing up to be able to deliver over what was only a 6-month period. And I think a scheme's been put together very quickly for understandable reasons, and when things happen like that, there is obvious inevitabilities around it. And I think part of this conversation is around the engagement of organisations to come in now. There's a longer period of time to be able to deliver through, so that you can gear up for it. You can consider what you want to do about PAS 2030 certification, and that you've got an opportunity to actually benefit from your investment in needing to achieve that. Now, I'd hasten to add, the PAS 2030 certification that was just spoken about isn't so much a Trustmark requirement. It's a government requirement that was established to try and bring a level of consistency into government funded schemes. So as Trustmark is licensed back to the government, we don't really get a sort of an option in whether PAS is incumbent within the scheme or not. It's just something there, and we have to work our way around it. So just very briefly just talk about some values. Vouchers cover 2/3 of the costs of expenditure up to £5,000, but there is an option for families that receive certain types of benefit to have 100% of the cost of the improvements funded up to a maximum of £10,000. So it's quite a lot of money per voucher or per allowance per household that's being spoken about in here. So one of the things I'm sort of keen we just have a bit of a touch on is, initially it seems complicated. As soon as you can understand it, it becomes fairly simple. Within the scheme, there are primary measures and secondary measures. So a consumer a customer has to have at least one primary measure installed before they gain eligibility for a voucher for subsequent secondary measures. And I think the reason is that the government's just trying to drive certain measures by priority with options for secondary ones, so that some on this list, they're not all of interest. I think it's probably important that you see the overall picture of it all. But there are, because of you as a specific sector, and bearing in mind we talk to a number of different sectors, so you tailor the interest according to who you're speaking to. But if you look down the left-hand column, there's some in there that will be interested. I doubt whether too many people on the call are interested in biomass boilers or hybrid heat pump installation. So let's just have a quick look at secondary measures. That's what they look like: windows and doors, heating controls, and insulation. Now, what I have actually done is there's a link at the bottom of the screen. So if the slides can get circulated, you can use the links to go in to find just a little bit more information. So if you use a link, there's plenty around. But what I would suggest that you do, or very strongly suggest that you do, is you've got to take your information from reputable sources. So initially, I would direct you towards the government website, the Trustmark website, because they're trusted sources of information. Now, the information will change and it will be updated, but when I glance at the internet, there's all sorts of information about the grant scheme, and a lot of what I can see is either probably very naive, or it might just be genuine misinformation for commercial reasons. So go to the original sources. Okay, so why has this been introduced? I don't think we should make any secret of the fact that that the government has introduced it to support the economy, because we're going to go into a period which is starting now where the economy will be affected because of COVID. We're aware of the fact that redundancies are starting to build because businesses have struggled or had issues, or they don't need all their staff because their order books have diminished in some way. So essentially it's propping up the economy, and it's been driven to support the creation of jobs. Now that's a really poor reason, or very sad reason, for such an opportunity to be given in our sector. And there is a bit of negativity about the scheme in terms of the supply chains being able to respond to it, in terms of customers being able to find the right business with the right registrations and certifications to be able to participate. And I don't think anybody welcomes that. That's just to do with a very accelerated rollout. But what it actually does is, the little bit that I came back in and heard about your preparations for PAS certification and being able to deliver within it, there's an inevitable sort of positive element of that a number of the teething troubles and some of the bedding down issues that are being reported, and some of which I see firsthand, have got time to settle before you've got the pathway into becoming involved. So in some respects, that can make, for the purposes of this conversation, it can make life a little bit easier because people have trod the path before you. It's a preparation to net zero, and we all know that all this is really directed towards taking the opportunity for the development and creation of jobs, and driving us all towards lower carbon housing, which is a massive conversation and a huge government agenda currently. So let's just get into a little bit of the detail here about what it is that you have to do, and perhaps why you have to do it. So I can't talk about the scheme rules, because they are to do with the administration of the scheme that's overseen by BEIS and delivered by their scheme administrator. But there is a website there. If you go to the government website, you can go into a subset, which will take you into a number of areas about how you apply to become part of the scheme from the administrator's point of view, because you have to register with the administrator, and you need to go in and just have a little look about the requirements of the scheme terms and conditions that you sign up to, how it works, the important thing about how you give a quote, what happens after the work is completed, and probably very, very importantly, about how the payment systems work. So that's a separate issue that I can't dive into the specifics of the questions around it, because we're not the administrator. We don't have the expertise in that department. I don't think it's our place to comment really. But in terms of Trustmark, these are the processes that you go through. So if some of the stuff that I talk about, and some of the subjects that were sort of ongoing when I came back in, they will raise questions to you. It's absolutely inevitable, because there'll be questions that you don't even know you've got until you wake up tomorrow and start thinking about them. So if you go to the Trustmark website, there's a lot about PAS certification that we've needed to create to try and support the sectors to understand what it means. Within PAS certification, one of the things I'm very mindful of, there's a number of sort of terminologies that are used that aren't necessarily second nature to all of us. When you actually get over the terminology and you realize what it actually means in ordinary practical terms, there's a bit of sort of easement, because you think, well, we do that, we do this, that's sort of I might not call it that might not be a process that I name in that way, but there's familiarity with it. So I'd strongly urge you to spend some time, go and look at the Trustmark website, start having a look around what PAS certification means, start having a look about what Trustmark registration means if you're not already, or if you need to extend, or you need more familiarization. And then the third step of that is to understand a little bit more about what you need to do to register with the Green Homes Grant Administrator, which is a process that you go through. And again, you sign up to terms and conditions. Do we get some questions about complexity about that? I think the honest answer is yes, there's a little bit that sits behind it. However, if as organisations you want to participate in public funded schemes, they're the simple requirements that BEIS put in place in order for somebody to be able to participate. So there's assurances around the quality of the work and the suitability of the businesses participating. So it's a little bit about education, and when you start to delve into it and have a look through, it's not as complex as it initially first seems, but there is some work to be done. Okay, so if you I'm probably doubling up on what might have just been said during my blackout there. If you need to understand more about Trustmark registration, it's really important that you speak to NFRC as your scheme provider. We will continue to work as closely as we possibly can with the scheme next year in order to be able to cross a few T's and dot a few I's in terms of understanding and supporting you to actually get absolutely where you need to be for the next stage of delivery. And I think that's important that we maintain that relationship and give you time through it. If you want other support about certification, then again, there's another website, a web page that we've put up. And one I think the really important, useful things is this little thing down here. There's an installer checklist. Now, I'm going to use a phrase that I detest really, because it just keeps coming round and round, and that's oven ready. What I think I'm trying to drive at in this is when you get to certification, imagine yourself turning up for a driving test. And what we all do at a driving test is learn to drive and become familiar, so that when the driving examiner asks us to do certain things, we know exactly what that means. And perhaps not an absolute parallel, and it might be considered a poor example, is that's what past certification is about. You need, as organisations, if it's the choice that you make, because it eases your resource and it eases the support, the support input from the scheme, the certification body, get yourself into the best shape that you can before your application for certification, because you will be oven ready to go through the process. And the more preparation that you put in, the easier it'll be. So it's a simple checklist. Do you do this? Have you got that? I wouldn't say it's absolutely unique. I'm sure things have been presented before, but in terms of practical terms, we're just trying to help people prepare themselves for what they need to do to make the pathway as easy as possible to participation. And I'm not saying I think it's reasonable because it's delivered by Trustmark. I'm saying it's reasonable because it's about information. It's about the content. Right, let's talk a little bit about compliance. I'm rather hopeful you can see a couple of documents on the left-hand side there, one of which called the Framework Operating Requirements that was spoken about a little bit earlier. And there is a specific support document that's attached to that, which is the Green Homes Grant Voucher Scheme Requirements for Registered Businesses. Now, that will be amended from time to time, but if you go into the website and use the useful links page, you can have a look at the documents in the Framework Operating Requirements. As installers, you're particularly interested in something called Annex A, because that's what you'll be assessed against to come in the entry point for Trustmark. The voucher scheme rules are what are required of requirements, or what are required of you as Trustmark installers in the additional areas that have needed to be established specifically for the voucher scheme. So there's something that I'm not sure if you may have touched on earlier. There's PAS 2030 certification, which is a requirement. The current PAS 2030 certification is dated 2019, because that's the edition that we work to. However, it is recognised that not every organisation will be able to get there immediately. So for a limited time period until the 31st of March 2021, there's been an easement agreed by the government that if you apply for your assessment and you can't come in under the 19 standard, you can be assessed to the older, in some areas more straightforward standard. So you've given an easement, which is assistance into the pathway in. Now this document called PAS 2035 that is being, there's so much discussion and debate around it currently, because it's quite a game changer, isn't applicable for every measure under the Green Homes Grant Scheme. It's applicable for properties of technical risk. So there are a number of installs that can be carried out in properties of lower technical risk that can simply be done under PAS 2030 installer certification. This overarching PAS 2035 requirement is a requirement for high-rise properties, insulating park homes, and in traditionally constructed and protected properties. So it doesn't mean traditionally constructed and protected as two separate categories. a property that is both traditionally constructed and protected in one building. So that's one subset. So in reality, I think that's a necessity because of the risk those types of buildings tend to represent. But there is a lot of work that can be carried out to the more straightforward installer standard. I think that's really important because it's about making the scheme accessible. So as I say, you need to look at the Trustmark requirements, and that's Annex A in the Framework Operating Requirements, again, to get yourself familiar with it. There's nothing in there that's been cooked up or simply created for the sake of creating it. They're just about good installer trading practices and the technical requirements that you need to meet for your own sector. So there's one additional requirement on top of that. That is the work that's carried out under the grant scheme needs to be lodged into the Trustmark data warehouse so that there's a visibility of it, and that visibility and the lodgement process is what enables is what supports the payment mechanisms to kick in once the work's been lodged. Now, lodgement is something that probably strikes a bit of fear initially into people's hearts, but when you see the lodgement process, it's been tested for almost 12 months now through the energy company obligation. So we know it works, and we know that it can be engaged with straightforwardly when there's a degree of familiarity. And again, on the Trustmark website, there is a lot of information about the use of the Trustmark data warehouse. And we have a support facility, which is support@trustmark.org.uk, where you can email your support request, and then we can respond if there's individual support that organisations need during their early days of familiarity. And I think it's in our interest to work with businesses that have a requirement to lodge, to make the process as easy as possible for everybody and clear out any sort of misconceptions that there might be. And then what we've been tasked with, which is a new thing to Trustmark, because historically audit work has been carried out by Trustmark scheme providers, and that's been within their territory. But under the grant scheme, Trustmark has been charged with carrying out 10% desktop audit of the data that's lodged into the data warehouse. And we sort of split that down into, is something just technically not quite right, where we can give somebody a nudge to put a different document in or get the right version of the document that's required. And then we transfer that. The desktop audits tend to inform us about where we need to go about on-site audits. So we do physically 10% on-site audits, which, as I say, historically isn't what Trustmark has created to do. But under the grant scheme, there's been a requirement placed on us to do it, which we welcome, because I think it's good for it's good to maintain quality standards and use lessons learned. So the on-site audits, they're not linked to payment. Once you've gone through the Green Homes grant process, you're eligible for payment. These are quality audits where we find issues that might need redress. We'll deal with the installer directly and have a conversation, set a timescale about what needs to be done, allow the remediation to be carried out. And as long as any remediation that could be required against the standard is carried out, it has no impact on payment, because you would have previously been paid anyway. So our audits aren't linked to payment. I think it's important to make that point, because that's all in the administrator territory. Right, one last slide, and then I'll go quiet for a few minutes until we get through the questions. I've deliberately put this in here to try and get you to think more about what it is that you may want to do about participation, and particularly around PAS 2030 certification. I'm not going to read all this verbatim, because you can see it yourself, but there's a lot of figures in there. 2.5 billion at the top, 50 million that could be extended to 4 billion over the social decarbonisation initiative, and something that's I think really significant, and one that I've been close to. There'll be a reaction from any of you that are landlords, but those of you that feed services into the sort of private rented sector, there is a consultation that's been put out by the government that ends, I think, on the 30th of December. So if you had interest in looking at it, then you might want to spend 2 minutes just to see what the opportunity is. If you just simply search private rental sector consultation, you'll see the consultation. I'm not suggesting that you respond to it. That's your choice. It's to have a look. But all private rented properties in England and Wales will be expected to reach EPC band C for new rentals by 2025, and all existing properties EPC band C by 2020, all existing rentals by 2028. Now you can see the figures there. There's a £10,000 cap for landlords to make that improvement, because they may make it for less, but if they can't make it within the cap, then there's exemption facilities. But I'm just looking at the size of the market there, and that's a big step change. So we think 70% of properties through England and Wales that are in the private rental sector don't meet band C. Now, in order for those improvements to be made, the consultation is seeking to establish that includes the requirement of Trustmark and PAS certification. So if you think about the two above it, the home upgrade grant, we've yet to see that materialise, but there's all the right signals around it. That PAS 2030 certification and Trustmark isn't just for the Green Homes Grant Scheme. There's a bigger, wider world that sits attached to it, and I think really that should be part of your decision making about what you want to do as a business. Because I think the thing that potentially, when I talk like this, is an elephant in the room, because it's already dawned on many people, is if the government is prepared to put grant money into a number of sectors, if as organisations you don't have eligibility to be able to deliver under the grant funded work, there is a potential, and I say potential, and it's probably quite a strong potential, that a customer may go to somebody that can enable them to gain access to that grant fund. So to me, that's one of the drivers in your thinking that you should factor in, is not only have we got a grant now, but future grants might dictate that I have certain eligibilities. And I think that's why you need to engage with your scheme to find out more and help you in help you with your decision making process about how you achieve this. There's no obligation on you. You just need to think about your business model and your sort of business planning, I think, really. And that brings me to the end of the slideshow. So with that, I'm very hopeful that to unshare my screen isn't going to drop me out. Stop sharing. Hopefully we're back in the room.
Well, thank you, Phil. And just taking your last point, in this commitment of government with regard to its net zero targets. In addition to that, we're very mindful of potential compliance matters with regard to building safety. And so very much the NFRC has been driven in its investment, and it's made considerable investment in this year into its certification side of its business through its NFRC Competent Persons Scheme, particularly with regard to a management system that will accommodate, transactional business in a very much more automated basis than we've done historically. I'm mindful now I think we've got about just about 15 minutes or so for questions. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Phil Campbell, who's in charge of Head of Policy and Communications at the NFRC. Phil.
Thanks, James. So the first question we've had come in is around, if you're an NFRC member and you're already part of Trustmark, do you also need to get PAS 2030 as well to offer the Green Homes Grant? Because the Green Homes Grant website suggests not. Phil, that's probably one for you.
Yeah, it is. So right, so Trustmark registration doesn't automatically give you PAS 2030 certification. PAS 2030 certification is something that you require as part of your Trustmark registration to gain access to the grant. So they're not automatically dependent on each other. There's two stages that you need to go through, and PAS 2030 certification is a very, very key fundamental part of that.
Okay, thanks, Phil. And in terms of the numbers of people with PAS 2030 in Trustmark, what is the overall number? And do you know how many of those are roofing contractors or NFRC members?
I can answer the first question. The one I can get back to you as a scheme and give you information around that. But the currently those PAS 2030 certificated businesses. Initially, there was somewhere around 950 something in the industry, and they were delivering mainly through the eco scheme. And we've seen a rise there to be, at last count, it was between about 1,300 to 1,400 businesses. Now, what we do know is, and this is part of the reason for the extension, is that the certification bodies in general that are delivering certification against the measures in the scheme, there are relatively high numbers of businesses that are within the certification process now. So there is a little bit of a logjam, and that's why I think that waiting, by design or not, until next year allows some of those logjams to come through and some of these clearing issues just to get the corners knocked off. So the numbers are substantial. Is that enough? I don't believe it is. I think the supply chain needs to continue to expand to be able to deliver the volumes, and that's always been part of the challenge. And all you've got to do is just look on social media, and you'll see those comments and observations. So that's where we are. But I'm saying generally, I know that's a big gap in 100, but let's say it's approaching 1,400, and it's increasing on a daily and weekly basis outside the sort of Christmas period. They need to increase more though.
Okay, thanks, Phil. I know from our experience, we've come across very few members that have PAS 2030 currently, but I'm happy to be corrected. If anyone on this call does have PAS 2030, please do speak up. Okay, so there's a question here around timeframes for Richard. So in your kind of map at the start, you spoke about when NFRC hopes to have their UKAS application completed, but when can companies get their PAS 2030 certification in place? Is there a chance that the companies have their PAS 2030 certification later than mid-March next year? So it's a question around timeframes and when companies can get their PAS 2030 certification in place.
So thanks, Phil. So we absolutely have confirmed our initial date with UKAS for our extension of scope, which is early part of February. We're then just now waiting for the final confirmation of a date, late February, for our witnessed assessment. And then we do very much visualise that between around about mid-March towards the later end of March, we'll be able to go out to members then to apply for extension to scope to their current certification status under the competent person scheme. So we're adamant that we will reach the target of the end of March 2021. But I think it's fair to say that we are at the mercy of third-party organisations who will need to audit us. And as we've seen during 2020, there's been a lot of disruption. So I'm very hopeful that we'll stick to those timeframes. We're making good progress in the last few weeks now. We've got a full plan of action into January and February, and we will be striving to bring that on time for our members. We will continue to obviously update our members, and I think that it's fair to say that this, again, we mentioned this needs to be the start of the process in terms of a webinar, and I'd be very keen to be able to personally update members during January and certainly into February as well, so that we can keep people up to date and also share what we've learned over the previous weeks then as well, because as we say, every day is a learning day for us all.
So without just appearing like a bloke that likes the sound of his own voice, which might have some truth in it, to not be first in through the door isn't necessarily any form of advantage. We've got an extended scheme that's had a slow start. So will the money run out by the time you get your PAS certification? No, that's probably a driver for a question like that. It's been a slow start, and we've had an extension. So the question doesn't necessarily need to be worried about, because all the money won't be spent by the time you get your UKAS certificate, your UKAS accreditation.
I think, Phil, what's probably happening, and I guess we've had a lot of calls from members on this, is that they're starting to get inquiries. And I think that's probably one of the. It's not being able to give a firm answer at this point in time back to the customer, and I guess it's very, very frustrating for the customers. I think extremely frustrating for our members. But you need to be rest assured that as the NFRC, serving you guys, we are doing all we can at a speedy pace. But we are, we do have to take into account dates provided to us by third-party organisations, and we also need to be, ensure that we're in the right place to offer the right level of service by yourselves and obviously to these third-party certification schemes. So, there's no grey area. It's either right or it's wrong.
And I think the message to homeowners is very much is the scheme has been extended by a further year, and there is £2 billion to be spent. And as Phil said, not much of that has been spent so far. So there's still a lot of money in the bank, and we're doing everything we can to get our accreditation to certify you as members to be able to do the work. So I think it's just a message to the homeowners just to slow down and wait and be patient until we have everything lined up so we can do this properly. In terms of Richard, there's 2 questions here related to qualifications and NVQs, and one person said, what role can Roof Cert play? So do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think there's an absolute requirement in all the standards, PAS 2030 standards, and I believe in the 2.2 framework operating requirements. And Phil can certainly correct me if I'm wrong in terms of the maintenance of skills. This isn't just about a one-off qualification that needs to be achieved, in a set period of time. We have to demonstrate through competent person schemes that there's ongoing validation of competency within an organisation. So Roof Cert provides that through accreditation for the individual over every 3 years, and that is designed to continuously upskill the industry through obtaining key evidence that supports the creation of additional CPD specific to the issues that we're facing in the industry through an evidence base. So Roof Cert plays an absolute key role in the future. We've also got the upcoming review of the MTCs, and the MTCs is the mandatory technical competencies for competent person schemes, of which we will be looking at adding a lot of the elements of Roof Cert into that process, which is in line with the new framework set out by the BEC strategy, which is an overarching framework for competency in the future, following the Building a Safer Future report. And I won't have enough time to go into that, unfortunately, on this call, but Roof Cert is well aligned for the future direction of travel for competency across the construction industry. So it's great to see that the NFRC have invested a lot of time and effort and money into schemes like this, and it does genuinely put us a couple of years ahead of the rest in that sense.
Phil, did you want to add to that at all in terms of vocational qualifications?
No, I'll just mirror the conversation, really. Mirror the comments there.
Great.
Thanks, Phil. That's the first person who said that to me tonight.
Richard, could you explain what the extension of scope means, please?
Yeah, I absolutely can. So there's, in my mind, and Phil, you feel free to jump in if you feel there's anything to add here. But as a competent person scheme, we first got to go for an extension of scope to offer PAS 2030. So at the moment, our competent person scheme under 17065 does not relate to PAS 2030. So we've approached UKAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Services, to ask for an extension to our scope in order to offer PAS 2030 certification to US members. There's then the scope extension of those already in or potentially looking to join the competent person scheme, whereby at the moment it's related to flat pitched or metal roofing. You would then apply for an extension to scope to add on to that flat roof insulation, pitched roof insulation, or rooming roof insulation, because those are the measures that we're going for under our extension of scope. So it's actually related to both, Phil, both us as the NFRC competent person scheme, but then also over to our membership to extend their scope of criteria under certificated activities.
Sounds right. The only thing I would chip in there, and we all got to be careful about getting the lid off too many boxes in one go.
Yeah.
As and when you become a PAS 2030 certification scheme, a certification body, you've chosen your scope. As a scheme, you might want to look at what other scope you may think you're well positioned to be able to deliver as well. And I think it's about everybody being able to run before they can walk and just not opening up too much. But it opens another world of opportunity, particularly as we just had a brief sort of discussion around some of the other stuff that might be on its way. Now, I know you've got a core role to fulfill, but it's something that's just worth consideration, I think. I mean, they're probably conversations we take offline, but there's a lot of opportunity in this, and there's a lot of opportunity scheduled to come after this.
And I think, Phil, that's absolutely key, really, in the sense that as an organisation, we want to put, ourselves in a prime position. You're absolutely right to suggest we don't want to run before we walk, and we certainly won't do that.
Right.
Well, first of all, give what the members need. We understand times tight. We understand going back to the frustrations around not already having PAS 2030 in place and the inquiries from clients. But absolutely, we then want to become on the front foot and go back to our membership and actually ask them, what else can we do for you? So we actually flip it around and then actually come back out to the, our membership on webinars like this and say, well, what else can we add? Yeah, because I think slightly behind the curve in one respect, although I think that's a benefit at this moment in time, but we'll certainly get ahead of the curve in the future by asking our membership up from what they want in the, in the coming months to years.
Thanks, Richard. We've had a few questions about costings. When can we find out more information around that?
It depends who you're directing that particular question to, Phil. Is that to myself?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Look, one of the. Let me start with one of the key points here. I spoke earlier on there when I was giving my presentation about not wanting to duplicate processes across one audit regime against another. I think what we need to do for our membership is carefully consider what's transferable in terms of evidence through data sharing agreements. We then need to obviously apply any discounts that can be related to those cross-mapped evidence criteria following on from that. And then we need to create a full pricing structure that's going to be aligned to the services that we then need to provide. And there is going to be different routes. And I think that's something, Phil, that is still to be completely determined in terms of exactly what routes will be offered in the future. But there will absolutely be fees in place naturally to access this work, and obviously it costs us as an organisation to provide this service as well. So I haven't got a firm date on that. I know it's been worked on. It's been worked on rigorously at the moment, and I'm hopeful that during the next webinar, or certainly during the next webinar in January, that we'll be able to provide a lot more detail around those costings then. Thanks,
Richard. We've had a question in from Mike Wharton. He says, what consultation has been undertaken with contractors to gauge interest in the Green Homes Grant Scheme, and what resources required to comply with the scheme, and the current lack of capacity in the industry? And just to answer that myself, Mike, this scheme was introduced very quickly by the government. As Phil said, it was a scheme that was introduced as a job creation scheme, essentially, off the back of COVID. And so it was kind of rushed through government, and there wasn't a chance to engage with industry, which is we feel is regrettable because we haven't had a chance to feed into it. But the scheme is there now, and we have to make it work, and we have to work with what's there. So while we can all reflect on what the government could have done differently, I think we have to work with what we have on the table now. That's a simple answer to that question. Phil, I'm not sure if you want to add to that in terms of the process.
I think Mike asks a very reasonable question, and he won't be the first person to answer it either. And I think you've answered it, Phil, in terms of the speed of delivery. I think we've got to take a positive note from this, that the government is prepared to put this. I don't even know what 2 billion quid looks like. How many wheelbarrows full is that of money? So we've got an opportunity, and it has been a slow start, and it has been a complicated start. But we've got an opportunity as a sector generally to be able to react to it. If we can spend that with quality and show the government what can actually be achieved, then what we're actually doing is demonstrating backwards that, and I don't know this conversation, is there possibility for more money to come through the scheme? The world around us might continue to change. So I think we've got to react to it as positively as we can, and take the sort of pluses from it, and just deliver the best quality that we can at the best pace that's available, because the lead-in time just hasn't been long enough for industry, and industry's reacting accordingly. So we are where we are, and I think we need to absolutely make the most of that now.
Phil, thank you. And just to add a further point to that, and taking Mike's point, if the scheme was going to end in March of next year, we wouldn't have made the commitments. So very much part of our initial thinking, we all know the failure of the Green Deal, and we had PAS 2030 as a as a accreditation historically, and with very little or no interest. So we've done a lot of research with regard to whether we believe in the long term this is the route to go. And very much we can all kind of criticize the government for on the one hand for not properly informing industry, but on the other, we've got to be really encouraged that they've done this, because there are other sectors as we speak who are on their knees. There's not this kind of level of support. So we've got to do everything in our power to make this work, to also inform, go back to government where things are not quite right. But we will attach this national retrofit strategy, which sort of takes things, in my opinion, beyond this March 2022. The final sort of serious point, this is an investment consideration for any business. Please don't take this, off the back of, say, having a few inquiries. Thoroughly research the market. The point Richard made on pricing, the reason we're not telling you prices today, because we want to minimize duplication. We see lots of other schemes. You can look them up in various other sectors of energy. As a price for this, as a price for that. One of the very simple considerations we had to take very quickly was this scheme fits into the CPS. And then how do we make sure we model and reduce the duplication in delivering PAS 2030? So please, we want to work with you. We want to consult with you. We want to make sure we've got, working contractor group to help to shape this. We're not doing this in some form of splendid or not so splendid isolation. So please, we want to work with you, and we're going to make this successful together. So on that note, may I thank you for your time this afternoon. Very considered time just before Christmas. May I, on behalf of all my colleagues, wish you a very happy, peaceful, restful Christmas, in the most, a year that we never want to see again, and all success to you in 2021. Many thanks.